I would like to introduce you to our next speaker, Valerie Krossin. She's a renowned expert in photobiomodulation. Today, she's standing in for Charles Rohrwaller, the company's chairman, CEO, and president of Aspen Laser. Most recently, Aspen Laser was honored with receiving an Inc. 5000 listing for 2020, the only medical laser company to receive that designation. Today's chiropractor in ChiroTech 2020 now presents you Valerie Krossin.
Good afternoon. My name is Valerie Krossin. I am the Clinical Director for Aspen Laser Systems, and today my intention is to take you through a series of questions that I often get asked when I'm in dialogue with a health professional regarding whether or not to add a laser therapy system to their practice. It's a photobiomodulation therapy is a phenomenal intervention for musculoskeletal pain and discomfort, as well as other modalities, and I'll take you through those as well. But the bottom line is the common questions that I get asked is, what is photobiomodulation therapy? How does it work? What does it work on? Is there evidence? Why isn't it everywhere if it's as good as we claim that it is? How do I choose a good laser? If you believe that it does work, how do I choose a laser that works and will give me the optimal outcomes in my practice? How much does it cost? Obviously, I want to pay the least amount of money for the best product that I can. So let's start first with what is photobiomodulation therapy. It's simply the application of light of very specific parameters to cells that are sick, degenerating, or at risk of dying, with the intention of stimulating their repair. Photobiomodulation is the chemical interaction of light with cytochrome C oxidase that creates a downstream cascade of healing, which is very, very significant. There's about 150 different cellular responses that occur from that initial absorption of light. So photochemical response. The interesting thing there is there are no side effects, and tissue will typically repair 30 to 40% faster with light than without light, again, properly dosed. So how does light do that? So it actually does one thing very well, and that's allow cells to naturally repair themselves by removing the roadblocks that are inhibiting repair in the first place. So light works on what's called oxidative stress. And oxidative stress is considered the underlying cause of every chronic disease. How that works is in the mitochondria, or the power plant of the cell, the electron transport chain takes the air that we breathe and the food that we eat and combines them to make energy. And when everything is going well, that's perfect. However, when the cell is under stress, whether that stress is from an injury, from a virus or bacteria, from a hormonal imbalance, whatever happens to be the cause of that stress, if the cells are able to neutralize oxidative stress at the rate with which it is produced, the cell can stay balanced and healthy. So what is oxidative stress? Oxidative stress is the production of a very volatile free radical called reactive oxygen species. And when there is more production of ROS than there is the cell's ability to neutralize it, then it triggers a imbalance, if you will, within the cell. And we refer to it as oxidative stress. And oxidative stress is the production of this very volatile free radical ROS, which degenerates and damages cells. And that damage can happen significantly at one time, like say a virus or a bacteria, or it can be a slow degenerative process over years, like diabetes, for example. Improper diet over time will damage cells to the point where they become diabetic and obviously less healthy than they should be. So how does light affect oxidative stress? So when a cell is under stress, it starts to produce higher than normal quantities of mitochondrial nitric oxide. And those, unfortunately, those molecules have a higher affinity for the oxygen receptor site, cytochrome C oxidase, than oxygen itself does. So the receptor site is bound up with this free radical. Oxygen cannot attach. The cell becomes even more stressed. And if that's not, again, neutralized by rest and antioxidants from our diet, our cell, the more stressed it becomes, the more it triggers the production of this very volatile free radical reactive oxygen species. Enough reactive oxygen species creates damage and degeneration. And again, over time is considered the underlying cause of every disease. When we shine correctly dosed parameters of light on the cells, specifically the mitochondria, and this enzyme cytochrome C oxidase, when it's absorbed within the enzyme, it displaces nitric oxide naturally, It's that and it's a very rapid burst or displacement. So when that nitric oxide is kicked out of the receptor site, it's actually absorbed by the local blood vessels, the endothelial lining, creating immediate transient burst of vasodilation. So it's a positive side effect. But what it does is frees up now the oxygen receptor site. Oxygen can now attach, and the cell starts to breathe again, which then increases metabolic activity, and the cell starts to heal because it's programmed to do so. So light does one thing very well, and that's displaces that free radical, allowing the cell to naturally go back to its normal process. So the downstream cascade then is very cell specific. Nerve cells respond differently than muscle cells, than any other type of cell in the body. So the point is light is at the beginning of the process, and homeostasis is restored to as much of a degree as that cell can heal based on the damage that's been done in the past. So light works exceptionally well on so many things because it removes the roadblocks to healing in the first place. And then the cells are programmed to take over from there. So that's how light works. It's a wonderful technology that when properly applied is amazing in phenomenal outcomes, but there's a lot of human variables and manufacturing variables that can create less than quality outcomes. So to answer the question is why isn't it everywhere, is because not all manufacturers are created equally, and not all practitioners are trained by clinicians. They're trained by salesmen oftentimes who don't necessarily understand the science, both on the science of human physiology, cell physiology, and on the physics of light therapy itself. So it's a very complicated industry. What does it work on? Most laser therapy devices have been FDA approved for musculoskeletal dysfunction, increased circulation, reduction in inflammation, reduction in pain associated with arthritis through the healing mechanisms that we were just discussing. However, light works at every cell level or on every type of cell. So the things that light is studied for, back to the question, is there evidence? There are over 500 randomly controlled trials, human trials. There are over 5,000 laboratory studies, and there are about 40 new papers per month being published and on PubMed every single week on the topic of photobiomodulation therapy, because it has such significant for profound outcomes, again, if properly applied. So when does it not work? If it's improperly dosed. So light is a dose-dependent technology. When properly dosed, it's no different than a pharmacological product, a medication. If not enough is delivered, it doesn't do anything. If too much is delivered, it can be harmful. If it's not delivered in the right intervals or the right frequency, it's going to be inadequate. It's the same thing with light. But when properly dosed, musculoskeletal conditions, traumatic brain injuries, neurological conditions like peripheral neuropathy, pelvic pain, chronic sinusitis, TMJ, headaches, Bell's palsy, shingles, vestibular health, the list is extensive because light does one thing and that does it very well, and that allows cells to balance and to start functioning normally and optimally again. The truth is light is a science-based technology. It's affected by physics principles of light, and it's affected by dosing principles. And those those parameters are wavelength, which is color. The color determines where it's absorbed and how deep it penetrates. I'll cover that briefly. How intense the light source is, the quantity of the light that's delivered is important as well. So let's kind of break those down just briefly here. Color is measured in nanometers, and the primary wavelengths that are utilized in photobiomodulation therapy are red to near infrared wavelengths. Okay, so color is key because it determines where it's absorbed. So red, let's go red. Hemoglobin, cytochrome C oxidase, and melanin are all absorption sites for red. Well, the interesting thing about that, it means is the more melanin that's in play, the faster the light gets absorbed and the more shallow the penetration. The type of tissue that we deliver it to, muscles have more blood in it than non-muscle tissue. It's a very highly active color though. Cytochrome C oxidase loves red light, however shallow. The second range, if you will, is the near infrared. So we've got the 600 range is the reds. The 700 ranges, there's not much photochemical response, so we skip that. When you get into 800 ranges, it's one of the deepest penetrating colors of light because the primary absorption site is cytochrome C oxidase. There doesn't seem to be many other absorption sites for the 800 ranges of wavelengths. So it's a very deep penetrating color of light. When you start moving into the 900s, however, we start to have additional absorption sites in water. Well, there's an advantage to that in that our cell membranes are half water. So it actually helps increase the redox potential in the cell membrane, allowing for those gated ion channels to function again more normally. That's what light does, is normalizes cell function because it removes the roadblocks to healing. So as those cell membranes start to normalize, what comes and goes is more appropriate. And therefore we have increased cellular health. But as far as depth of penetration, because our bodies are so much water, we're 60 to 70% water, the majority of that light is lost to water. Great for the cell membranes, but again, reducing depth of penetration. So you have shallow red, deep 800 ranges, and then you start to become shallow again in the 900 ranges. When you reach 1064, it actually has a very deep penetration again. The water absorption starts to disappear and we go back to cytochrome C oxidase absorption. So the primary colors of light are red, 600 ranges, but 800 is your dominant, and the 980s for the water, and then the 1064s are just entering the market in the US because of the very deep penetrating and the high cytochrome C oxidase activity. So that's called action spectra and depth of penetration. So that's color driven. Now, when you start adding the next topic, which is dose or power, this has to be explained as well, because power is not just quantity or watts of light. It's how much watts or milliwatts, photons, basically, how many photons are being delivered in a treatment area. So there are actually a couple physics principles that affect this as well, because if you put, let's say, light, let's go in even 1 watt of light or 1,000 milliwatts into an area that's about the size of a dime or the size of a 50-cent piece, you have two very different intensities of light, much more focused in the dime size than you have in the 50-cent piece. If I treat both for 1 minute, I have the exact same joules or total energy applied, but I have very different intensities, high intensity versus moderate intensity. The high intensity causes different tissue response than the moderate intensity. So they refer to it as a biphasic dose response, or some have heard of what's called the Arndt-Schultz law, which is a bell curve. Just like medicine, not enough light, or intensity in this case, does nothing. You start to move into a therapeutic window. When you reach too much intensity, which is approximately 300 milliwatts per centimeter squared, you start to go from photobiomodulation, which is stimulatory, to photoinhibition, which downregulates cell activity, but it does not harm it. If you actually go significantly higher, we're all familiar with cutting lasers, right? Or surgical lasers. So again, this is another topic that gets mismarketed in the industry when they start saying class 3B versus 4. Class 3B is simply under 500 milliwatts per individual diode, and class 4 is simply over 500 milliwatts per individual diode. It does not take into account the area being treated, so it's a marketing myth, so ignore it. The key is inhibition, photostimulation, photoinhibition, which is downregulating the cell but not harming it, and then photothermal obviously is very uncomfortable and you want to pull away. So those are the keys to understanding the intensity of light, because intensity determines what happens when the light is absorbed. Well, that's affected by some physics principles. So there's one called scattering. When you put light into the tissue, it scatters in every direction about 30 degrees, wide and deep. So if you're going 6 centimeters deep and it goes from, say, this side to this size, you have a much larger treatment area by the time it reaches those deeper depths of penetration, and everywhere along the way it gets wider and wider. So the dose is actually changing as it penetrates into the tissue. So the strongest it will ever be is at the surface, and then as it goes in, it becomes wider, deeper, larger treatment area, less intensity, and less strong, if you will. So now it gets to, so that's the intensity, or it's called irradiance in light therapy. Now the next thing is the quantity of light. That's the total watts being delivered. That's the number of photons being delivered. The number of photons over area is the intensity that we just discussed. So think of it this way. you have to have enough quantity of light to fully saturate the tissue to get the outcomes that are desired. If you use a small amount of light, where let's say a 500 milliwatt diode for 1 minute with the same irradiance as you do a, let's say 5,000 milliwatt diode, 500, so 10 times stronger, same intensity, but the available medicine for therapy is 10 times less in the 500 milliwatt diode. So the 3B versus 4 argument is not about heat, it's about quantity of light available or medicine available to affect the outcomes. Most research is done in the laboratory with LEDs or low-powered lasers. The reason for that is the animals are very small. You can very quickly saturate tissue with a little bit of light because they're small individuals. But when we get to humans, the depth of the target is dramatically bigger and deeper. So if you're trying to reach a spine or a glute muscle in a human versus a mouse, you need way different quantities of light. So your tissue outcome is intensity, but you have to have enough light to saturate the tissue so there's enough medicine available to do the job. And that's where your class 4 or high intensity lasers, sometimes they're nicknamed, but your class 4 lasers are far superior because there's so much more quantity available. We teach to treat in a slow, very, very slow pattern with a lot of light, pulsed, because pulsing is a on-off, if you will, duty cycle, and it reduces the thermal risk, but also drives light deeper. All of these things are important to product selection, because if you don't have a product that is versatile, in other words, I can take it from 500 milliwatts to 30 or 45 watts and everything in between based on, again, the depth of my target. And if you want to be able to pulse it, you want to have multiple wavelengths, so you have multiple medicines that you can have accessible. So the treatment considerations that are also affected by physics are on skin versus off skin. So if you've got a company that says to you, I'm treating off skin, no matter whether it's close or far away, there's this thing called the inverse square law. The further the light gets away from the diode, if it's a non-collimated beam, again, the more divergent that beam becomes, which means the treatment area gets larger the further away it goes, which means the intensity gets weaker the further away it goes. Reflection, if you are off skin, that light hits the skin, 80 to 90% of it bounces into the atmosphere. The 10% that's remaining, you've lost most of your dose, is rapidly absorbed in the skin. So you have actually more of a warming or intensity, heat intensity response if you're off skin. And so your depth of penetration is dramatically reduced. So to have quality outcomes, you need to have that laser directly against the skin so that it eliminates the reflection, and then it scatters every degree. So it needs to be low enough intensity so that's comfortable at the skin level and non-thermal. So if you don't have a manufacturer that builds equipment that's very versatile, 500 milliwatts to whatever the max dose is, typically you're going to want to have between 20 and 30, sometimes even 45 watts of available light to use. So your manufacturer has to have very versatile equipment. Your clinician needs to understand how that is reflected in the tissue and can teach you how to properly where to treat and how much light to treat based on depth of target, based on the equipment that it's using. I've said many times, I've been doing this for 13 years. My background is nursing for 20 years prior to that. If you give me any laser, I can make it do its best possible job based on its parameters. If it's a low powered device, if it's less than, honestly, I don't think I'd ever want to use a laser less than 10 watts at this point after using lasers this long. So the next question I often get asked is, will my clients pay for it? Absolutely, they'll pay for it if it works. How do they know it works? It's light. How can light do all these wonderful things we're telling them? Do a free demo. Show them that something. I tell people, we have what's called a $100 challenge. If I can't change your range of motion or your pain in 10 minutes or less and make it 50% or less than what I started with in one area, say the solid size of the palm of my hand. If I'm treating a shoulder, I might have 4 or 5 different treatment areas, but I'll give you 10 minutes in one spot. You point to your worst part of your pain. If I can't change that pain to 50% or less and give you better range of motion in 10 minutes or less, I'll give you a $100 bill. I've never had to give away a $100 bill because I can do it because I have the right colors and enough quantity to rapidly saturate the tissue without a thermal response and get quality outcomes. So the next question is, if my clients will pay for it, what does it cost? How many clients do I have to have paying for it to cover my costs of my laser so that I can make a profit with it? Because we're all in business of helping people, but we're also in the business of business. So what does a laser cost, and can I make that work? Well, let me backwards it for you. So if a typical treatment cost is $50, and the reason I say $50 is it's relatively close to a copay, and most people can afford $50. There's only two reasons people don't pay for laser: if they don't believe it works, and if they truly can't afford it. And there are some that truly can't afford it, but most people can take their disposable income from somewhere else and put it to therapy if they believe that it's valuable to their outcomes. So how much is it worth to somebody to get on the floor and play with their grandkids again? We can't prejudge that. If they feel it's a value, they will pay for it. So we try to keep the price around $50, which is very, very close to a copay. And honestly, most people can find $50. We ask them to purchase 6 to 10 sessions based on acute versus chronic. And again, most people can come up with $300 to $500, even if they have to put it on a credit card, if they believe that it works. So how do they believe that it works? We show them. We do a free 10-minute demo to have them pick their worst area of pain, and we change that pain dramatically in 10 minutes or less. Now there's no convincing or selling. They believe that it works, and we just show them. We've earned their trust, and they then put their trust in our therapy because they already trust you or they wouldn't be there. They put the trust in the therapy, and now they can they give you a check for $50 per session, $500 a package, or $300 a package. So how much does it cost? How many clients or how many treatments does it take to make my equipment pay for itself? Well, if it's $50 a session, 3 treatments a week is $150. 4.3 weeks per month gives me $645 per month. 3 treatments a week will pay for any laser that costs $33,000 or less. That's at a payment of $645 a month. And the reason I say that is when you do a 6% average interest rate for qualified people over 5 years, a $33,000 piece of equipment will cost you $640 a month approximately. So it takes 3 clients per week to pay for your equipment. Anything above and beyond that is profit. So what's the potential? How many people in your clinic have musculoskeletal pain and dysfunction, reduced range of motion, or musculoskeletal pain? 90% or higher if you're a chiropractor or a physical therapist. So 95% of your clients qualify. If even 25% of your clients actually are willing to pay for it, which is much higher typically, but if only 25% are willing to pay for it, you have a return on investment that's bringing in $4,000 to $8,000 per month. It's a massive return on investment, and it's immediate from the day that you start introducing it to your clients. Typically, most of our practitioners will pay for their equipment in the first 3 months that they have purchased it if they introduce it to every client that walks through the door. Some will, some won't. Who cares who's next? Because you're helping people. They have to decide if they can afford it or not. So that's the majority of my presentation today. I hope that answers the majority of your questions. It's the ones I get asked the most frequently. Thank you for your time today. I hope this was helpful, and I look forward to working with you.